everybody, it's Fernandez here from Fernandez Dog Training, following on in my series called Lifting All Ships, which has been a series of video interviews, vlogs, whatever you want to call them, with people that I consider friends, peers, mentors, and just people I've been interested to talk to in this current climate, to find not only how they are dealing with this strange and surreal moment within our time, but also to get their insight about dog training, and specifically online dog training, which all the people that I've thus spoke to have an entity, have a field in, or certainly offer it as an option. So the person I have in front of me today is the absolutely fantastic Shade Whitesel. Let me get the name right. Who is a colleague and another faculty member from the FDSA. She is also somebody that I absolutely admire and respect infinitely for her ability to be a somewhat buck the trend within her sport, and daring to tread a path of somewhat solidarity and being not afraid to just go against the grain, to pursue a sport which is largely, to be truthful, traditional and somewhat compulsive by nature, and she's very much taken the path of reinforcement-based dog training, and that's the sport of IGP. She's a championship level competitor. She's titled numerous dogs to IGP3, and has also competed at nationals. I've got to remember this. You've done a lot of stuff, Shane.
Yeah.
So
I've been in this sport for over 20 years, wow. So I've had a lot of dogs. Yeah.
So again, and other than that, incredibly charming and absolute. She's one of the people that I love to watch train. And what I find even more when you post your videos is your insight on your dogs, and that's the bit that I love to watch, because you absolutely know your dogs, and you absolutely can see how they're thinking and their behavior, and I just find that so intriguing and beautiful to watch. So thank you very much, Shade, after that introduction. How are you keeping, and how are you doing?
I'm doing good. You have good days and bad days, but I've been doing a lot of training with my dogs, so I'm taking advantage of being home, or not traveling for seminars to get more consistent training. So that's been a really good thing, because when I'm home and not giving seminars, I can consistently train, but if I'm gone every other weekend, then it's much harder to get something consistent, like working on heel or working on a particular skill like retrieve or something. If you've got to train 3 days and then you're gone for 5 days, it's much harder. So I'm actually appreciating that time with my dogs to train. And specifically, I have a younger dog who is so promising. And I'm really appreciating getting his obedience skills down. Like, I'm doing his retrieve, and I'm showing some of that on Facebook and Instagram. And he's just so cool that way. Really? He's just it's fun, and he's so promising. He's so fun to train in particular skills. So yeah.
So just for the people that maybe haven't come across you before, just tell us a little bit about you. Obviously, you mentioned your primary sport that you do is IGP. You have done obedience as well. You have titled a dog in obedience in the States. So you are based near Seattle. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Like about my just training journey kind of thing?
So first off, so you're based in Seattle, you live on a rural place, a little bit of that, so which is really amazing. You were just discussing it with me prior to coming on to do this conversation. Just tell us a little bit about that, and a little bit about the logistics of where you are.
So I live west of Seattle. So I live on the Kitsap Peninsula, and there's two ways. You realize you live on a peninsula when you have to take a ferry to get to the mainland, or I can drive south and take the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. So if anybody remembers the video of the bridge buckling with an earthquake, that is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Okay. It's like a historic video.
Okay, all right.
So, anyway, so I live a little bit rural and a little bit cut off. So actually getting to like training clubs I live pretty far away from everything. And currently, before kind of the world got canceled, I was driving to Canada. So I was taking a ferry and driving to Canada because my current IGP club is in Canada.
Wow.
So, and now they've closed the border.
Yep.
So I don't have any idea when that's going to resume. I think they closed it for another 30 days. So Schutzen's kind of canceled at least this spring for me, if not, for a lot longer. So
how long would that take you then to get there?
So I would take the 6:30 ferry, and I could get across the border if, at 6:30 in the morning there's no traffic, and if there's no traffic at the border during the winter, I could get there by like 9:15.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Wow.
So one way, 3 hours, and then much longer coming back because there would always be a wait at the border, and then traffic, in the afternoon. So, but it is so worth it to train with people who feel like you do. So, and I've been struggling to train with people who we're all on the same page. So, so it's refreshing to be in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it's really obviously I do a lot of different sports, and one of them, I think IGP people are much more sort of in I suppose much more committed to going, do you know what, if I have to travel to another several hours or to another country, I will do it, because I think that it's a relatively small sport in comparison to, say, agility in numbers wise, and you sort of have to go to where the good helpers are, because again, a good helper is absolutely crucial to your dog's upbringing, and even more so if you want to train your dog in that particular sport to access a good helper that then is happy to follow a slightly different approach. That's then narrowing the field even more so, isn't it, really? Also, it's amazing that you've got in Canada. So who's the helper that you use at present then?
His name, there's actually 2 helpers in the club, which is just amazing because clubs are built around helpers. And so his name is Brad Hoffman and Mark Ellis. And so they're kind of an offshoot, and I think both of them are trained in other ways. Brad has titled a couple dogs to IGP 3. And so they kind of decided they wanted to do it with limited correction, and it's about 5, 6, 7 of us. We'll see. And we're relatively new. But yeah, it's been really, really awesome. And I haven't had a helper to work with who feels the way I do for quite a while.
Wow, that's great.
So it's very refreshing.
Yeah, and you have a promising young dog. It's like everything's starting to merge together.
Yeah, definitely. And, once, I wouldn't describe my older shepherd as promising, but he's taught me so much. And it's really neat to take that knowledge that I've struggled with such a challenging dog in a challenging situation, and be able to apply it to my younger dog, who is just really talented in the bite sport. So,
really, wow.
And the dog that I did most of my national championship stuff with was One's father, Reiki, and he was a great dog. I mean, we don't get great dogs all the time. We get normal dogs, but he was just so good,
really,
and he made me look good.
Right.
But his son, One's, has stretched my training, and now I can apply it to the next great dog I have, which is just I'm very excited about all my possibilities. So
just on that line, so just give us a little bit about your back. You said you've been in this sport, is it 20 years?
Yes.
Wow.
That makes me feel old, but yes.
So how did it all come about then? So what was your background? How did it all start then?
When I graduated from college, I wanted I had a childhood dog, but I wanted a dog. And for some reason, I wanted a German Shepherd. I don't really remember why. But I remember I considered military an art, and I was always drawing the German Shepherds for some reason. Right. So I wanted a German Shepherd. So this long ago, you got them through the paper. So I went and I got a German Shepherd through the paper, and she happened to be half German. So she was half American and half German. And in Hindsight, she was all show lines. So she was half German show lines. And so I kind of looked up German Shepherds and learned about what we called Schutzen at that time, and just thought it was really cool. So when I moved to Seattle, I found, so I lived in Seattle. I was in Maryland at that time, and I moved to Seattle, and again, the phone book, looked up Schutzen in the phone book.
Wow. My
like
God.
one person, I know, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
There was one person under it, some trainer, so I hooked up with him, and he was, in hindsight, I don't remember much about it, but in hindsight, he was just kind of trying to gain money by having a Schutzen thing. He wasn't actually doing Schutzen. Right. But it made me more and more interested, and then I met a Schutzen club and joined, and she was show line, so she was kind of nervy. I mean, she was a great first dog, but Schutzen was not her thing. And I remember when I was looking for my next dog, the person who was the training director of my club, who had show lines, was like, you know what, you don't want show lines, you want a working line. And I wonder if he saw that I was attracted to the training and the working and the competing, and because he definitely steered me towards working lines, if it makes sense. Anyway, so I got my first working line, and so titled him. And
who was that then, Shade? What was that dog's name?
His name was Jesse, and he was, I mean, this was like 20 years ago. So he was from an old German breeder. He was a very, very nice dog. He had some tooth problems that affected his grip. And it was my first dog. And in those days, with our first dog, we tried to title. We just titled. We didn't expect to win nationals. So, and he did really well. He was awesome. Got him to Schutzen 3, got him to a couple regional competitions. Wow. Yeah. And then started really kind of wanting to compete and looking for more of the competition kind of stuff after that. So,
Wow. So how was that dog? That dog was trained more traditionally, compulsively? Yep.
He actually, it's an interesting story because he taught me a lot. He had the pinch on him. We all trained with prong collars, pinch collars. I didn't think anything of it. But also, at that time, we didn't use a lot of e-collars. Like, e-collars were just starting to come into sport training. And I think about it now where it's like the sport puts e-collars on dogs very, very soon. And the e-collar was something you used later on as kind of, it wasn't a go-to. And so it was expected that you could train your dog without an e-collar, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But you definitely had a prong collar on them. And then he failed his Schutzen 2 twice for not outing. So I remember it's probably what started me looking at other alternatives, is that the advice was stick an e-collar on him. And I was like, well, not just yet. And so I kind of took him away to another trainer. We experimented. And I did eventually end up putting an e-collar on him and passing his 3. But it taught me a lot about all the reasons he wasn't outing. And it wasn't so much disobedience as it was he didn't feel comfortable guarding, all that kind of stuff. And he became quite dangerous at a certain point. Really? And we had to work on his confidence and where to properly bite. And that had nothing to do with the e-collar and everything to do with, hey, this is the behavior you should be doing. So that taught me a lot about figuring out other reasons. I think what I'm trying to say is reinforcement-based reasons instead of going wham bam to the correction to get him to do. And while I eventually did put the e-collar on to get him to out, it taught me a lot about what to do before that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, to teach thoroughly. Yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
what was the So, was that dog the catalyst for you thinking, I need to look at different solutions or different methodology? How did that evolution happen as a trainer? Because, again, just to qualify and explain about the sport that Shade and I do, is it's generally accepted, and this is not judgmental, it's accepted that within those sports that pinch collars and electric collars are accepted forms of training techniques or methodologies or tools that you use at your disposal. And I think it's not about judging people for it, it's just a given, that's what it is. And to not use those tools is actually you are the elephant, sort of the elephant in the room, really, or it's it's not the norm, really. So when you, as an individual, bearing in mind that was, a considerable amount of time, I think it's now becoming a little bit more au fait now because of people like yourself. But at that time, that must have been really controversial to go, okay, I'm going to take a different path. How did that all pan out then?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the deciding point for me actually was that particular dog in the back transport. And the back transport exercise in Schutzen is where the dog has just bit the guy. You take him, they're guarding the guy. You come up, you tell him to sit, and you tell the bad guy, the guy with the sleeve, to walk ahead of you 5 paces. And then you're supposed to follow them with the dog, and the dog needs to stay kind of in heel position. And with that particular dog, Jessie, of course, they don't want to stay in heel position. They want to look at the guy. They want to guard. They want to bite them. They don't want to stay 5 paces behind you. So we were using the prong collar, and this dog was 95 pounds. He was huge. Wow. And I was a bit skinnier than I am now. So I was like 110. And I could not correct him hard enough to make a difference. Okay, so he was like, whatever, this is part of the exercise. I'm all excited and I'm all like up here. And he was quite a strong dog. So when my training director tried to correct him, it didn't go so well for my training director. So we couldn't nobody else could safely correct this dog. I couldn't do it. And that was part of the thing of me trying to figure out how I could get this dog to heel with me. And something that's very common now, it was just obedience for bites. But we never did that. We never ever did that. So it was kind of discovering on my own that if he would stay with me, I would send him to bite. And that being successful rather than correcting over and over and over again. That was a big deal in my learning for me to go, okay, this is what's working for this dog. And then I saw no reason why to not do that with the rest of my dogs. So even though, I still used other correction with this particular dog, in that I didn't have to use correction. And it's ironic because people come to me today saying that their dog blew through the e-collar on the back transport. I'm like, I know how to train that without correction. I can fix that. Might not be able to fix the other stuff, but I can fix that. So
it's really essentially the dogs that almost shaped your behaviour then, that for at the time it wasn't sort of I think for a lot of people it's I think when you're talking about certainly positive training in that world, it becomes very much a them and us, and it's the ironic thing, it was very much the dog shaped your behaviour. The dog went, that isn't going to work, so you're going to have to come up with something.
I've seen a lot of people who use a lot of correction get a dog who blows through the correction in whatever way, and it's really made them reevaluate reinforcement-based training. And so it is the strong dogs and this dog was an incredibly strong dog, and the correction not working on him is what shaped me for sure. And I was just thinking how it's the strong dogs that the correction doesn't work on. Like this morning I was letting my girl dog out, Bales, and she had a bone in her mouth. And I'm just like, drop it. And I've never taught that dog drop it. She had this high, this raw meaty bone in her mouth. I said, drop it. And she's like, okay. And she just dropped it and went out. She's a soft dog. Boys would have been like,
no.
Nope.
Yeah.
I would have had to figure out some way, or I would have had to escalate my drop it or whatever. But I was thinking how if I had dogs like her through my life, it wouldn't have made me so reinforcement based.
Well, isn't that ironic?
Because she would have just they would have just
done
dropped it.
Yeah.
I have these really strong boys, and they're like, nope, you got to figure out a way to make that worth my while.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? How dogs ultimately shape our behavior, isn't it? It's amazing. So given that, you know, you were very much, I suppose, even if you talk globally, very much you know, who did you look to for guidance, for ideas, or did you just go, do you know what, I'm going to have to figure this stuff out on my own, or did you look at other sports? Did you look at other communities?
That's a great question. So with Jess, I was lucky that I had another trainer who felt a little bit like I did, so I could go to him. But I still use the e-collar, I still use the prong. With the next dog, I didn't use the e-collar and actually didn't see any reason to, but I definitely used a prong collar on him. And I kind of want to mention him because I got his Schutzhund 3 on an away field when he was 3.5 years old with a 291, and we got 100 in obedience.
Wow.
And I was having so much success in obedience that I was like, why can't I train the other 2 phases without correction? And so at that point, I wasn't really looking outside Schutzhund because I was having a lot of success in what I was doing. I was kind of figuring out what I did. But that dog died 3 weeks after he got that title.
Wow.
So I was kind of left with no dog, no sport. And so when I got the next dog, how is it? So the kind of 2 dogs after that was Rake. I definitely was like, I don't want to use correction on this dog. And that's when I started seeking other people out to see if anybody else was doing it. We didn't have the resources we did. I do want to say, though, that Chad Byerly and Sarah Keegan of Posse Dog in Columbus brought Guy Penny. He's in Belgium. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. So they brought him out.
So I'll just interject there. So a couple of points there. So just we're talking as if people would understand the term. So the first thing is Schutzhund is what you would call IGP, or it was IPO. It's changed its name 3 times. IGP, Schutzhund, IPO, it's all the same thing. It's a 3-phase sport, and when Shade was talking about phases, there's 3 entities to it. So you do an obedience round, which is a combination of heel work, sendaways, jumps, retrieves. You do a protection round, which at the top level the dog has to do various phases of that particular test. They have to locate a criminal, or the helper as they're called in the sport. They have to then display things like guarding them. The helper will attack the handler. The dog has to defend the handler. There's various entities to it. And the third phase is the tracking phase, and where the dog has to track in a very, very stylized manner, which is different to a lot of tracking, and the dog has to indicate the article. So that's the sport that Shade and I are talking about. The person that Shade's talking about, his name is spelled, I think it's spelled Guy, G-Y-E, but it's pronounced Guy Penning. And was he a police officer?
I'm actually not sure.
Okay.
I don't think he was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in Belgium?
Yeah, Belgium, yeah.
Okay. So Chad and Sarah brought him and his friend Axel out, and the 20 of us that were interested in positive Schutzhund went. Right. So he did a Schutzhund week and he did a ring week, and we all went. I flew my dog there, and in these states it's so big you kind of can't drive everywhere. You gotta fly. And it was awesome because we were all meeting each other for the first time. Social media wasn't such a big presence then. So this was like 10 years ago. And so I had my young dog Rake, and and that's when it really started, where we started reaching out and seeing that other people were doing. And that was really instrumental in actually meeting each other and having more of a national community or a world community. And I won't say that we really kind of got together and problem solved, but we definitely could then call each other and say, hey, we have this issue, you know. And I remember I didn't feel so alone anymore. So yeah, so that was very helpful.
Wow. So you obviously then started training Rake, is he 12 now?
Yeah, he just passed away last year.
Oh, sorry,
but
my bad. Yeah.
He was 12 and a half. So yeah.
So and he was the dog that you trained entirely reinforcement based, or positive, or whatever we want to call it. Yeah. And he was the dog. Was he your most successful dog that you've had?
He was the most successful dog.
Wow.
Definitely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That must have been, again, reinforcing for your behaviour to go, after all that, your dogs had shaped you to that point, and then this particular dog reinforced that journey, so to speak.
Yes, so he was a very good dog, and he did very well. At kind of 3.5, we went to Working Dog Championship, and he got 5th. And it was really surprising because I was a nobody, and I just kind of flew him there, and we got 5th, and all of a sudden I was kind of on the national scene. So it was very, he made me look very good. So
So, and then he obviously took you on another journey in terms of, I suppose, competing at that level with that ilk of dog using reinforcement based. So it was about maintaining behaviour, it was about behaviour chains and all that sort of stuff. Sorry, go on.
That was a big deal, because it's one thing to get there and have one good performance.
Yep.
And it's a whole other thing to stay there and maintain. Yep. And I learned a lot about maintaining.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Yeah, and I think, funny enough, because are you speaking at the Lemonade conference?
I am.
Yeah. So both Shade and myself are on the Fenzi Dog Sport Academy, and I discussed that's where I don't know, how long have you been on the faculty?
7 years.
Yeah, 7 years. Yeah. I think we were about the same sort of time when Denise started to ask other people. So we've been there relatively sort of probably when it's actually more or less when it started, wasn't it, originally? I think it was about 2013. We're both speaking at Denise's Lemonade conference, which is something that Denise has come up with to where there's a ridiculous amount of speakers, and it's absolutely amazing. So check that out, and I posted it when I spoke to Denise. So I'm just digressing there, but the one of the things that I'm talking about is reducing reinforcement for competition, which is something that I think those of us that gravitate to reinforcement-based dog training, we have this innate desire to want to reward our dogs. But the conflict is there's a necessary evil that we have to at some point ask the dog to do behaviour for no immediate reinforcement, shall we say. I mean, we could argue that behaviour chains are reinforcing, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But the gist of it is the dog can't have the treat or can't have the ballie instantaneously. They have to be able to, in order to compete successfully or reliably in competition, and then to the next level, which is to compete at a higher level and to do it regularly enough to hopefully be competitive, which is what you did with Reiki. So how was that for you? Was that a learning curve, a bit of a trial and error? How did that all work out?
It was a huge learning curve, and I think that it's still a learning curve for me. And I think it's very much a learning curve for a lot of positive reinforcement-based trainers. And specifically in Schutzen, where you have a very long, or IGP, where you have the obedience phase itself is very, very long. And if you couple that with kind of the waiting before you start and then the critique where the judge explains everything you did wrong, hopefully did right as well, it's a very long time without reinforcement. And a lot of the issues I see out there are because we don't quite know what to do. So it's so I'll be tuning into your talk for sure.
So it's definitely something I think that all of us has been, when we transition from traditional methodologies to positive or reinforcement-based methodologies, I think it's something that all of us at some point have struggled with, of how to create behaviour change, because I think all of us were au fait with, well, the dog doesn't do it, we just correct it, and then they do it, and then happy days. But how do we train them to do long behaviour change? And as Shade explained, an IG3 obedience round could easily be 10 to 15 minutes of sustained work easily. Would you include the stay, the duration stay, the whole test itself, and the critique? You're talking 15 20 minutes easy. And your dog has to be focused, it has to do behaviors individually, it has to meet criteria, and so forth and so forth. So how to do that again successfully is a huge learning curve that I think all of us have been on. So you, after Reiki, you one of the things that I initially came across Shade was, and this is the thing that I was really drew me to her as a trainer was, her and Fanny Gott from Sweden. So Fanny Gott is an agility trainer from Sweden. Were the first people that I saw that were using reward specific markers, and you can define how you perceive them. But reward specific markers is something that I've been doing with my dogs for probably about, I'd say, 6-7 years, and Shade definitely before that, and probably Fanny even before that. But for me, if I was to talk about my dog training journey, there's been milestones. One of the milestones was clicker training or reinforcement-based dog training. Another milestone was shaping and shaping effectively, and an absolute milestone was reward-specific markers. I know there is a lot of... It can sometimes be a controversial subject, and it can sometimes perplex people and confuse them. I am absolutely signed, sealed, and delivered about the use of them, and I think they're absolutely... They just create so much clarity for my dogs. Shade was the person that I saw that did it for a sport that I was interested in, because I was dabbling in Schutzhund or IPO, and Shade was the person that I thought I stumbled across on YouTube, as you do, and one of the early things was reward specific markers, and also you were doing precursors to tracking training, so you were doing lead yielding and things. I think it was with ones, and I was like, whoa, this is really interesting, because this is stuff that I thought, oh, do you know what? I can get this. It just resonated with me. So tell me about how you came to use reward specific markers and the evolution as a trainer, how to use them now and the effect they've had.
So I was first introduced to them with Sarah Keegan's at Posy Dog, and she was using a whistle thing that meant it made two different sounds, and it was two different rewards for her dog. And I was like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
Such sense. Yeah. And I remember I went home and I tried to find this whistle online. I couldn't find it, but I credit Sarah entirely. And Sarah also pointed out that the dog is in different arousal. And I think that, I don't want to speak for her, but I think that she was interested in the fact that in bite work, the dog is in such high arousal when they're biting the decoy or the helper or the bad guy or whatever we want to call them. And we often would like them to take some other type of reward that is different arousal. And you see it all the time if somebody's trying to reward their dog with a ball in bite work and they're using yes to mean a reward, and the dog's wanting to bite the decoy on yes because that's the reward they're thinking about. And so I basically took that and I thought it was the greatest idea ever. And I just went with it. And that also led me on Sarah's advice to go to find out what I could about Fanny, who really was using it different locations. So she had different words for different locations. So I feel like Fanny gave me the location part, Sarah gave me the arousal part, and I just took it and ran. And I think for those of us who do really high arousal, high energetic sports, specifically with toys, it really makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the dog is in, they make a lot of mistakes when they're at that excitement. And so it's one way to get to make sure they're listening to their reinforcement cues. And then it's also, it expands your toolbox when you're working at such high arousal.
And I think for me, for me, I think it also takes away a lot of the conflict. So when you can say to the dog, that was a brilliant bark and hold, but I'd like you to take your ball at this moment rather than focusing. And that in itself is absolutely, it just speaks volumes to the dogs. And I think, I absolutely echo what you've said about it. It's great for anybody that does sports that have require or encourage a lot of high drive. So agility, IGP, field trials, anything like that. Obedience, I think it's great for loads of things, and I use it in my obedience. But I think definitely for sports where the dog is in such a heightened state of arousal, you can absolutely manipulate their mind and their thinking and their state of arousal like that. And I've said this so much on seminars. I don't understand why people don't use them. I really don't, because you're going to help your dog so much, and you're going to create so much clarity.
I also think it's important in sports where you have you and the handler and the dog, and then you have the really exciting thing out there. So if you think about protection, you have the really exciting thing out there. If you think about agility, same thing.
Yep.
Actually, if you think about tracking, same thing.
Yep.
Okay, so it's very important because all those things, the dog doesn't know what to pay attention to, and our handler cues are never clear.
Yeah.
And so I think the location markers makes a lot of sense. I'm actually giving, so the Lemonade Conference, I'm giving, my presentation is on marker cues.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm finally doing it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting subject to me because I found it hard to put in writing what I think about marker cues, because I swear my, how I think about them evolves month to month.
Really?
So yes, it really does. And so I kind of want to make this point. If we're using the clicker, let's say we're using clicker or yes as a generic, you get your reward.
Yep.
We're actually teaching the dog is to hear that sound, and that sound means orientate to my handler to see with their body language what I'm going to get and where I'm going to get it.
Yep.
Okay, so that's what the clicker means. It means orientate to my handler to see what I'm going to get. With the location markers, the dog already knows.
Yep.
They know what they're going to get, and they know where and how they're going to get it. So that's the difference. If you use location-specific markers and you keep the food in your bait pouch all the time and you don't have it in your hands, and you give the marker cue and then you reach into your bait pouch to get the food, you shouldn't be using location-specific markers because it doesn't matter, because the dog is just watching your hand as it goes into the bait pouch. Does that make sense? And so when I see people saying it doesn't work, that's what I see is that in order to get the full effect, the dog should show
you. Yes. Yeah.
They should show anticipatory body language between a marker cue and where they're going to get the reward. And if that particular marker says orientate to my handler, awesome, fine. But a lot of them don't. And so there should be a difference in what body language your dog is saying.
Yeah, you see, when you review videos, a classic thing that people do is they overshadow their mark. So they mark and they simultaneously move. And actually, the dog doesn't hear the mark. It actually is responding to body language. And you see that so consistently. And again, for sports that require drive, when the dog is in that height or state of arousal, the dog has reacted, it's committed to that moment. And then, say, for example, it was a bite issue, you'll want to click the dog for barking, but you don't want it to have the sleeve. If you use a generic marker, the dog's on the sleeve. Game over. Now you go, okay, well, I didn't really want him to do that, and etc., etc. The other thing that I have an all generic click. I use that, and it gets paired with different reinforcement. Absolutely. The flip side of that is, when I use my clicker, my dogs don't necessarily know what the reinforcement is. That can work in my advantage, but if I have a really, really high drive dog, I'm creating a little arousal spike. And they're going to get wound up. Oh no, and what happens is it's a bit like the click in itself, or the reinforcement is on a variable schedule reinforcement. So my generic click actually creates them really, really aroused. Well, that might not be what I want in that moment. Sometimes, absolutely, it is. But I think there's so many rare places where, for me, reward specific markers have been absolutely instrumental. And again, the other aspect is affecting the dog's emotional state and its arousal of, I don't want you to be headless at this moment, I need you to be more thoughtful, I want you to be all balls out not thinking, I want you to go for whatever it is. So you can instantaneously, whereas the generic click, the dog hears the click, it now has to watch your body language and then make a decision about the reinforcement, and you're in a lot of ways devaluing the power of the click, can't you?
Yes. And you can also be like, let's say you mean to reward the dog with food and you have a toy in sight, you actually might be getting depending on your dog, you might be getting some disappointment. So they might think that yes means, they get the toy in sight, and then you're like, no, you get food. And then the dog is faced with some negative emotions there, which I'm trying to avoid a lot of in my training. I'll never forget, one of my fellow trainers was teaching her dog. I don't know, it was some part of healing, and the dog was having difficulty in like a right turn. And when the dog finally did it, she meant to reward her with food, and the dog went around behind her and grabbed the tug. And then you're faced with trying to get the tug out of the dog's mouth. And by the time all that conflict's over with, the dog forgot what it did right. And I just looked at that and went, wow, that would have been so cleared up if the dog knew what it was getting, from the get-go. So,
I think initially when, I've delivered this talk to people go, whoa, hang on a second, I can barely remember one word, never mind, however many you have. The thing that I would say to people is just start off conservatively, just introduce one marker word. And then once you're comfortable with that, then add a second one if you feel necessary. I mean, I have specific words for specific dogs and specific that I don't use. It's not all my dogs have the same marker words. So I use them for sport specific, the sport specific and dog specific. But just do what you are comfortable with. And honestly, I cannot sing their praises enough. And I wish more people would embrace the concept of them. So hopefully, listen to your conference talk. They will. Yeah. The other thing,
it's going to be a good presentation.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So, bringing it back to your dogs at present. So, you talked about your, not youngest dog, your middle dog, as it were. Yeah, middle dog. So, tell us a little bit about him, because I know you've got really strong, strong beliefs about the breed and drive versus arousal versus, and what should be the things that we... in your opinion, we should be looking for within dogs, and this is generic for all sports dogs. So just tell us a little bit about him. Obviously, he's the son of your older dog.
Yep. So he's a son of Reiki, who is so good and what I would describe as clear-headed. To give you an example, so I don't usually use food to train anything in protection. Okay, so normally protection is a higher arousal for the dog. So if I'm going to reward the dog, not with the helper biting, I'm going to reward him with a toy. I'm not going to reward him with food. Reiki was like 10. I was doing something protection-wise, training a new helper, and I gave him the food word, and he instantly turned around and took food. Wow. That was that kind of dog, where he was so clear-headed that after 10 years of never getting food from protection food, he could just turn around and eat food. Okay? A lot of dogs, you really have to train that skill. So that was him. I bred him. I got onesie. This was the puppy that resource guarded pig feet from the rest of the litter. I had 12. Wow. 12 puppies. And I looked over, and onesie is standing there, and he's got 3 pig feet in front of him, and he's got 11 other puppies in a semicircle, and he's keeping them all off. I went to myself, who's going to take that puppy?
And you looked in the mirror, Shade.
I couldn't, good conscience, give that puppy to anybody else. So I took him. But he's been, so I bred him, and I want to take responsibility for that, because I'm going to sort of say what's wrong with him now.
Yeah, great.
And he's a wonderful dog in many ways, so I don't want to say that I'm throwing him under the bus. Yep. He's definitely an example of a dog with big feelings who finds it very hard to control himself. And I think that we should be breeding dogs who control themselves a little bit better, if that makes sense. And I'll give you an example of what happened on my run this morning. I saw a rabbit. I'm just starting out, so the dogs are all excited. I have onesie with me, and I have Talik, who's the promising young dog. And I see this rabbit, and the rabbit's doing the rabbit thing. It's by the side of the road, and it's frozen. I'm going to be approaching on this one-lane road. And I see it, and it's frozen, and the dogs don't see it. And we literally get 4 feet away from this darn rabbit, and it shoots across the road. Okay, 4 feet in front of us. I'm not exaggerating. And I was prepared for it. So onesie lunges, of course. You've got this fleeing animal. I'm going to lunge. He's 80 pounds. I have my hands full. Talik looked at the rabbit and stood there. And then we quietly walked by. So onesie, his initial reaction is just he cannot control himself. He just lunges, and whether it's a helper, whether it's another dog, whether it's whatever, that is his instant reaction. I see something, whoo, and then he goes, whoops, I'm not supposed to do that, and he turns around, he's like, I'm being good. Whereas Talik's like seeing this, and just stands there
Yeah.
and goes, I can control my prey drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And it's not that Talek doesn't have prey drive. Talek has huge prey drive. Okay. But he can control it. Does that make sense? That difference?
Okay,
right
so
there?
there's a couple of absolutely beautiful points there. The first one is there's a term that you use that is often bandied around in protection sports, which really is one of those hocus pocus. What does that mean? It's the term clear-headed. Everybody is looking for this clear-headed dog. So how do you define a clear-headed dog?
Okay, so a clear-headed dog to me, well, actually, let's define prey drive first.
Yeah.
So, because we bandy around the word drive.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to say that prey drive specifically is the dog's, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right. It's involuntary reflex, basically.
Yep.
It's activated by the prey.
Yep.
So the prey would be the rabbit or a toy or something flitting. It can be a leaf,
Yep.
flitting across the dog's vision. And that stimulus puts the dog into that frame of mind.
Yep.
So I think, do I have that right scientifically?
Yep.
I think.
Yep.
Okay. So a clear-headed dog, to me, is a dog that has that reaction, but doesn't have to act on it.
Yep.
They
Every single time.
themselves.
Yeah, it doesn't have to act on it. It's so. To discuss it, my interpretation of clear-headed is the dog that actually can almost innately, naturally, be able to self-regulate and read a situation. Appropriately. So the rabbit that's 100 foot away, the chances are, sweetie pea, you're not going to chase it. Don't react to it. The one that's right under your nose, maybe that might be a possibility. That would be a fair moment for you if it was a rabbit was jumping in your face, or again in the context of protection, by all means. But then there's no need for you to be hysterical in when you see a leaf blowing or something flapping in the distance. So it's that innate ability to discern between the two things. The conflict is that there's a misconception that one's reaction, that is the trait in which we've been misinterpreting as the desirable trait, and therefore we see a lot of dogs, and that then manifests, in my opinion, becomes a reactive behavior, becomes aggressive behavior, becomes also they get aroused really easily and over aroused easily. There's all the flip side. So essentially, most people would look at a dog like Wands and say, yep, sign me up for that dog. That dog's got all the traits that I would want for a working dog. He's impulsive, he's impetuous, he has no self-preservation, etc., etc. Yep. Absolutely, I'll have one of those. In fact, give me two. And then you realise the flip side is you have to live with and train with that ilk of dog. And the irony is that a dog that would appear to be much more, I'm going to say, I haven't met him, but I'm going to say lesser, like Talek, who's like, nah, why would I chase the rabbit? There's no, people would look at that as a weaker, lesser dog. And the irony is that's really the dogs that we should, because not only he's the type of dog that you can live with and you can train, and he's still going to be able to be all the dog you'd ever want without the reactive, without the impulsive nature, which then takes a hell of a lot of dog training to fix.
Yes. And so, and if we look at our sport, Onesie has a terrific hold and bark. You stick a prong or you hold that dog back and he's going to go instantly into high arousal frustration. Talek has been very hard to get a good hold and bark on because he doesn't
get frustrated
easily. And ironically, Talek was bred by a breeder who's been breeding German Shepherds for 30 years. She was one of the pioneers of doing, of competing in Schutzen when it first started in the States. So she knows what she's doing. And she told me, so Talek is a repeat breeding. And she said to me on his first breeding, she said, these dogs remind me of the dogs that we used to have.
Wow.
And I said, if you ever rebreed that, give me that, because that's what I remember and that's what I want. And that's what he got. And it's not that Talek is perfect. I mean, he's a German Shepherd. He's going to do German Shepherd things. He's going to notice the environment. He's going to bark at stuff. And hold and bark is a little harder to get because he doesn't frustrate as easily. But he's got all he's got all his stuff, and it's not like he's a dud. He's just harder to reach a little, because he's making good decisions. At the risk of anthropomorphizing him, he does. He evaluates the situation and goes, okay, no, I'll have to react to that, you know?
It's really interesting, and it's ironic that dogs originally shaped your behaviour to gravitate to reinforcement-based dog training. And it's ironic that dogs actually shape the type of dogs that we are ultimately breeding. So I think the misconception, certainly with sports, and you see this very much in certainly sports that require drive. I'm going to say drive and use the term loosely. So sports that require a dog to be in a heightened state of arousal, I think that's a better way of putting it. They in my opinion, and I think Shade's on the same page in that they misconstrued frustration or response to frustration as drive or excitement. They misconstrued hyperarousal as drive. To me, drive should be stoic, it should be still, it should be poised, it should be almost, for want of a better term, deadly and silent, as it were. You know, a dog should be like ready, staring intently, and then react, and then go back to being waiting patiently. That to me is the ultimate example of drive. If you look at sports like, for example, a sheepdog, a really good border collie on a sheepdog, you never see them barking hysterically outside. They're lying, probably sleeping. You take them to the start line, bam, and they explode off there like 100 miles per hour. They do their job, they walk off the field, they switch back straight into social, pet-like, great social manners, quite indifferent. And to me, that's the ultimate display of what drive should be. And I think that often with breeding dogs for sports, we get eluded by faster is better, more crazy is better. And also, those dogs tend to respond well to minimal, I say effort, that's a bit harsh. But, you could put a dog like Wines, probably move a flirt pole and he'll be baying like a wolf. Happy days. Talik's probably going to need a little bit more patience and a bit more building. So there's more responsibility on the trainer's shoulders to be patient, to build, to nurture. But the ironic thing is that dog will probably stand the test of time. Now, and I'm speaking out of school because, again, they're your dogs, but I get the impression that One's probably protection was like, yeah, great, sign me up. I'll react to the person moving around and being really frenzied. But then, from an experience point of view, that comes with a lot of fallout. A dog that just goes, yep, I'll switch on. Yeah.
So, One's looks really great in the hold and bark.
I bet.
The easily frustrated stuff. But it's really hard to then get control out of him. And it's hard for him to hear me. So I mentioned that his dad could just hear right away, take food right away, hear his reinforcement cues. It took a lot of training to get One's to that. Right before the world kind of got canceled, we were starting outing with Talik and protection. And the first time I say out, he hears me. He's like, oh, okay. He just outs. He can hear me. He doesn't go to that place where he can't hear. And it's just so refreshing to have a dog like that. So,
And you would say the dog largely had those traits naturally?
I didn't do anything. Right. He just had them.
Wow. Really? So, looking at your two dogs and talking about Ones, what would you say are the biggest milestones with him that you've gleaned from that experience? And is there anything that you feel you could do differently if you had your time again with him?
So can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Something I would do differently with Ones now, based on the experience? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes. Though I don't, one of the things that's really hampered Ones is that I haven't had a consistent club. So he hasn't had as much consistent training.
Right.
It's difficult to say, but I feel like in protection, which most of his issues are that I couldn't control as much, is we made the protection work too serious for him.
Right.
And if I had to do it differently again, I would make sure that part of it wasn't there. And he was a dog that went there.
Yep.
And wanted to be serious. And as an older dog, we can see its aggression. We can have all these terms that we use.
Yep.
But I would have kept it a lot more fun,
playful
for that particular dog until we got a lot older.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good. That's a really for again. So we're getting a little bit sort of IGP in terms of terms, and so it's if you have a dog like Once who is almost a little bit predisposed to uh being a little bit more serious about the sport, what tends to happen is
Yeah.
the dogs can take the game and make it in just again not with little I suppose with a little instigation from the way in which she's trained, it's naturally that way, and they will bring that to the fore anyway. Whereas I think Shade's message is, in hindsight, and again, hindsight is a wonderful thing, she probably would have made it a lot more play and a lot more like, again, maybe even use food and protection, who knows, to try and combat some of that issues. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I would have had the helper do things differently because the specific helper I was working with, we both wanted, I'm not blaming it on him because we both wanted to go there. And I would make it a lot less serious for him. I would, it's not so much that I'd make it a game, but I would make him more successful. If that makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, that every dog you have, they teach you something, isn't it? You know, and they make you again a better dog trainer from the back of it. And each dog you say shapes your behaviour and your subsequent decisions. So in terms of you've obviously got Talik, you've obviously got, because one's he had an injury. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Is One's what?
Did One's have an injury?
Yes. So One's hurt himself. He tore his right cruciate, and we don't know how bad it was because I didn't X-ray him or MRI him. But I also didn't do surgery, so I did kind of rehab exercises. I did some other stuff, and he's to all appearances is sound. And I do a little bit of protection with him, but he's essentially retired.
Really?
And I was considering retiring him, but now I really have to retire him since 2020 is canceled. So that's pretty much the end of his career that way. However, I do want to say I do have resources to do French ring, which is another sport, fight sport entirely. And I'm actually exploring French ring with Onesie.
Oh, wow.
Which is really interesting. To see how he does it differently. He loves French ring.
Wow.
Loves it. And okay, so here's the thing I would do differently with Ones. And now that I think about it, in IGP, we want the dog pulling on the sleeve, or traditionally that's what we want. So one of the things that I did wrong with Ones is encouraged him to pull on the sleeve, and we used, he didn't want to pull. He's not a puller. He's a pusher. He wants to push on the sleeve. And his whole Schutzen career has been teaching him to do something that he doesn't want to do genetically. And in ring, we encourage pushing. And it's awesome because you can see the dog genetically go, this is what I was made for. And that's probably why he likes ring, where his whole body language is upright. He's biting legs, so he's upright and pushing and more confident rather than avoidance pulling, which is what was happening.
Oh, interesting.
So it's really interesting.
Wow, that's really fun. That little detail again. So, again, another like delving into that. It's almost like the way in which he was trained to do protection was conflicting for the dog genetically.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes, very much so.
Oh, how interesting.
And and I can totally see it in front of me because Talik is a genetic puller from day one.
Wow.
Just pulls. He'll be an easy Schutzen dog who wants to pull. Onesie, I had to encourage to pull. I had to reinforce. It was really hard on the helper to get him to pull. And you can just see the difference in the dog's confidence. So, you know, I teach this when I teach toys. I say, I don't care what your sport wants. You need to do, first what the dog enjoys. But I I didn't do it in my own sport, and I couldn't seem to convey that to the people who were also training ones.
Yeah.
So that is something that I would change and feel strongly about going forward. It doesn't matter what your sport wants. Mm-hmm. You have to go first with what the dog enjoys.
Oh, that's a great message.
Genetically.
Yeah, and I think, do you know what? That's such a great message, Shade, in that I think sometimes in dog sports, if we're truthful, ego can sometimes get in our way, and we get a little bit, like, right, I've got this dog, and this is what I'm going to do with the dog, and it doesn't matter whether, and it's almost a mark of a good trainer to, get this dog that doesn't want to do it, and you go, there is something quite ironic in that this is sport is, it's meant to be a game that we play with our dogs, and I'm not for saying give up or don't train the dog, but also have empathy for who and what the dog is, and accept the fact that the dog, not all dogs are going to be world champions, and that's absolutely okay. It's absolutely okay. It's similar. Shade and I have had this private conversation about bringing dogs back from injury. Punch had an injury which took years to resolve, etc., and how it's really hard and demoralizing, and it can be a real journey in internally to overcome that. And and he's very similar in the sense that he was a dog very much like you say about Talik. He didn't do well. He's not a dog that gets frustrated easily. He's a thinker. He's a very calm, stoic dog. So it took, again, a lot of thinking laterally about training him, and ways in which, again, he took me on another training journey, but also embracing the fact that the turning point, and I always felt strongly, again, the message that you got was, I knew he wasn't a Malinois because I didn't go and buy a Malinois, and I got a boxer because I wanted him to behave like a boxer, and when he did boxer things, that was absolutely okay. And I think that's a great message for anybody listening, to accept the dog for who and what they are, and almost go to who they are, and see what they excel at, and to see what they like doing. It's our ego that says, I've got the dog to do IGP, and that's all they're doing, end of. Well, what if your dog really likes tracking, or really likes nose work? Do that. It's meant to be a sport. I think all of us do dog sports for a way to engage with our dogs to a more in-depth level, and as a way to create a relationship. And I think if the relationship is about what I want to do and the dog has to toe the line, that's a little bit of a juxtaposition, really, in my mind. Yeah, great message.
And I think it's actually, so you said, one of the things you liked about my training was that I really know my own dogs. Yeah. And it's really ironic that you said that, because yesterday when I was training Talik, I was actually a little bit frustrated with how our healing is going. Yep. And I was trying to figure out what was working for him. And I was like, because as you train a dog through the years that they grow up, mm-hmm. it's really important to figure out that individual dog. Yeah. And I think it's funny that you said that about me, because I actually realized yesterday that I wasn't doing that enough with Talik. Really? I wasn't figuring out who he is. I can say who I think he's going to be. I can say who he reminds me of. Yep. But I need to be better about
who he is now.
Getting to know him.
Yeah, and who he is now. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But the one thing I say, I think Yeah, I thought, isn't it ironic how the universe works, in that yesterday you had that moment of doubt of, who is this dog, or that frustration, and yet the very thing I feed back to you is, that's the thing that, for me, you as a trainer absolutely read your dogs and know your dogs. And, it's so interesting isn't it how funny how probably at this moment you go, how ironic that you were questioning that, and yet it affirms it to you. You know your dog, Shade, and hold on to that. So it's amazing how these things work out. Shade, it's been absolutely, I could talk to you for hours. You're so intriguing and so interesting. I'm sure we could talk about a dozen different topics. I thank you very much for your time. It's been absolutely riveting. I thank, on a personal level, I thank you for daring to tread a different path and having the guts and the balls to do things a little bit different and take the heat for it and push through. So you have my utmost respect.
Thank you so much for having me and thinking about having me. It's been really fun.
Yeah, take care, Shade. Yeah. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing your boy on the world stage.
Yes.
Take care.
Definitely.